I'll never forget the way my grandson looked at me that morning. His eyes were so pure, so full of that innocence that doesn't yet know the world's malice. And yet, his question was a stab that pierced through all the years I thought were solid. "Grandpa," he said, playing with his toast, "why do Grandma and her friend moan when you're not home?" He asked it with the naturalness of someone saying anything at all, with that lightness only children have when they repeat what they hear without understanding it. I froze, the fork fell from my hand onto the plate, and the metallic clatter was the only thing that broke the silence. Linda, my wife, had her back to me, pouring coffee. Her hand trembled for a moment, barely perceptible, but it was enough for my heart to start pounding like it wanted to escape my chest. She said nothing, didn't even turn around. I, on the other hand, had to force a smile, one of those smiles that hurt at the corners, held up only by pride. "And what's this friend like, son?" I asked in a calm voice. He shrugged. "I don't know, Grandpa. I just hear him talking from the room when you're not here. Sometimes he says your name." My soul stopped. The air, the smell of coffee, the birds singing outside, everything disappeared. Only that sentence existed, floating between us like a suspended knife. I swallowed hard, trying to stay on my feet. "You must be mistaken, champ. Sometimes the TV is on loud and it sounds like someone's talking, huh?" I said, trying to sound light. He nodded, suspecting nothing. But I knew, deep down, I knew. As Linda served breakfast at the table, I avoided looking at her. I could feel her shaky breath behind me. The sound of the spoon against the cup seemed like a clock, counting down the seconds to a collapse. We ate in silence. Every chew tasted like a lie. Every averted glance was a confirmation. And then, between the distant sound of the radio and the crunch of the toast, I realized that when love dies, it makes no sound. It just dissolves, like sugar in coffee. But before I continue, I'd like to know if you subscribe to the channel and if you're enjoying this story. This helps me see that you're with me and enjoying what I write from the heart. Now, let's continue. When my grandson finished his breakfast, he ran to the garden to play with his ball. Linda stood by the table, pretending to look for something among the cups. I watched her in silence. Her face was pale, her eyes evasive, her lips pressed tight. For the first time in 40 years, I saw fear on her face. "What was that, Linda?" I asked calmly. "What thing?" she replied, not daring to look at me. "What the boy said. You know how kids are, Robert. They make things up." "No, he didn't make that up. He heard it. And you know it." Her hands tensed on the table. She finally looked at me. Her voice trembled slightly. "Are you tired, Robert? You always misinterpret everything." That sentence was the confirmation. When someone denies so quickly, it's because they can no longer hold the truth. I stood up slowly. "Don't worry, Linda. I'm not going to argue." She watched me, confused, as if expecting shouts or insults. But no, silence is crueler when you know what it's hiding. I went to my workshop, the small room in the back where I fixed clocks as a hobby. I turned on the lamp and just stared at the hands spinning. Clocks don't lie, they just move forward. And at that moment, I decided that I would let mine move forward too. I remembered our life together, the years of sacrifice, the trips, the cold nights when all we had was one blanket, and the promise that everything would get better. I remembered how we laughed when we were young, how we dreamed of growing old together, and it hurt to think that maybe the woman who slept next to me every night no longer existed, that she had been buried under the lies I myself refused to see. I barely slept that night. My grandson's question repeated in my head over and over, like an echo that wouldn't fade. "Why do Grandma and her friend moan when you're not home?" The innocent words of a child had ripped me from the comfort of my blindness. And the worst part was that the pain didn't come from the deceit, but from the deceit of so many years believing we were still the same. I got up before dawn. While the rest of the house slept, I walked through it with a disturbing calm. I looked at the portraits hanging on the wall. Weddings, birthdays, Christmases, frozen smiles, dead promises. Everything seemed so fake now. In the reflection of one of those photos, I saw myself, an old man, with a tired face, empty eyes, his dignity hanging by a thread. And I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to beg. I was just going to discover the truth with my own eyes. That promise was my fuel. During the day, I pretended everything was normal. I smiled, I worked, I talked with Linda about trivial things. But inside me, every word she spoke was a thread breaking. That night, when she went to bed, I watched her in silence. She turned her back to me, as she always did lately, and I understood that when love grows cold, it leaves a gap between two bodies that not even the sheets can fill. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to plan, because I knew that the next day I would do something that would change everything. I would lie. I would tell her I had to work late, and when the sun went down, I would come back without making a sound. I don't remember having a longer day in my entire life. The hours passed slowly, heavily, as if time itself was mocking me, knowing that all I wanted was to escape my thoughts. I tried to focus on work, on reviewing some documents, on fixing an old clock I had on my desk. But every tick-tock was a question drilling into my soul. Since when? Who was this friend? And how much of our life had been a sham? Doubt doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in slowly, like a leak that ends up flooding everything. And that day, I felt it filling me up inside until I was drowning. It was raining outside. The sound of the water against the roof reminded me of the nights when Linda and I slept in each other's arms, when we still believed that love was enough to protect us from the world. She used to tell me, as long as we can laugh together, nothing bad will happen to us. And for years, I believed it. For years, I was blind. Sometimes I think that routine was our real enemy. The days became so alike that we stopped looking at each other. I took refuge in my work, she in her silences. And when love dies quietly, you're slow to notice the smoke. I remembered the first time I saw her. She was just 23, with black hair, a wide smile, a sweet voice. We met at a town fair. I was selling old clocks, and she was with her mother. She bought one from me, even though it didn't work, just to talk to me. That night I knew I wanted to spend my life with her, and for decades I thought I would. Now, 40 years later, that same woman was sharing her laughter with another man, and she was doing it under the same roof where we slept, where we raised our daughter, where I saw my grandson take his first steps. The thought hurt so much my stomach burned. I lit a cigarette. I hadn't smoked in over 20 years, and I opened the workshop window. The smell of tobacco and rain brought back memories I no longer wanted, because everything, absolutely everything, had Linda's face on it. During lunch, she acted as if nothing had happened. She made soup, served bread, even smiled. I watched her every move, every word, looking for a crack. But Linda was skilled. Her lie had the elegance of someone who has lied many times. "Is something wrong, Robert?" she asked suddenly. "Nothing," I replied. "Just tired." "You've been acting strange since yesterday. Maybe the coffee didn't agree with me." I looked directly at her, waiting for her to look away. And she did, just for a second, but it was enough. "Don't worry, honey," she said, touching my hand. "Everything is fine." That word honey sounded hollow, worn out. It had no weight or truth anymore. It was like an echo from another time. After lunch, I went to the garage. I needed air, distance, anything that would let me think. I sat in the car, without starting it, and closed my eyes. In my head, images of the past mixed with phrases from the present. Everything that had once made me happy was now a dagger. I thought of Ethan, my grandson, of his innocent voice asking that question that had torn open the seams of my life. "Why do Grandma and her friend moan when you're not home?" A child doesn't make things like that up. He just repeats what he sees, what he hears, what the world teaches him before his time. And that's what hurt the most, that Linda's lie had also reached the purity of that little boy. I spent the afternoon in silence. I couldn't face her. I was afraid of what she might say if I cornered her. Because it's one thing to suspect, and another to hear the truth with your own ears. The first blow destroys, the second kills. When night fell, we had dinner together. She talked about trivial things, the garden, our grandson, a neighbor who had gotten sick. I nodded but didn't listen. I just analyzed her, every gesture, every pause. I studied her as if she were a stranger, and in that cold observation, I realized something that shook me. I didn't know who the woman in front of me was. At what point did she stop being the girl who waited for me at the workshop door? When did her gaze change? Her voice, the way she said my name? The answer was simple and cruel. A long time ago. I just hadn't wanted to see it. That night, while she slept, I got up in silence. I watched her in the dim light filtering through the window. Her face was still beautiful, but there was something in it that was no longer mine. It was like looking at an old painting. You recognize the shapes, but you no longer feel the same. I walked to the kitchen, opened a bottle of wine, and poured a glass. The clock read 2 in the morning. The tick-tock kept me company. Constant, cruel. I thought of all the times I waited up for her, worried when she came home late and said she had been visiting a friend. I thought of the laughter on the phone, the messages she quickly deleted, the nights she went to bed without even saying good night. It was all there, it had always been there. And I, blind, had preferred to believe that love was still enough. The doubt was no longer a doubt. It was a certainty, and the certainty was worse than any suspicion. I put out the cigarette, drank the last sip of wine, and stared out the window. The rain had stopped, the sky was clear, and in that silence an idea slowly formed in my head. I needed to see what was happening with my own eyes. It wasn't enough to imagine it. I had to face it. I went up the stairs, opened the bedroom door, and lay down beside her. Linda slept soundly, oblivious to the hurricane she had already unleashed inside me. I turned to the wall and closed my eyes, making a silent vow. Tomorrow, when the sun sets, everything will change. They say that when trust dies, there's no burial possible. And it's true because you keep walking, breathing, even smiling, but inside something is already dead. That's how I felt. The following days were a routine disguised as normalcy. Linda would wake up early, make breakfast, hum songs while she cooked. But her voice didn't sound the same anymore. It was an empty voice, soulless, as if she were singing just to keep from thinking. I watched her in silence, studying her every move. Every time the phone rang, she answered it with a speed she didn't have before. She would walk a few steps away, speak quietly, and when she came back, she would smile at me as if nothing happened. That smile was her mask, and for the first time, I could see it. One Tuesday, while sweeping the workshop, I found a scarf on the car seat. It wasn't mine, nor was it hers. It had a strong, expensive, masculine cologne on it. I picked it up carefully, as if it were evidence. For several minutes, I stared at it, breathing in that scent that didn't belong in my house. That was the first blow of reality. That night, Linda came home late. She said she had gone to visit her friend Betty, the same old excuse. I nodded without questioning, but when she walked past me, the smell of the cologne from the scarf was on her neck. I didn't need to ask anymore. The truth was right there, floating between us, unbearable. I locked myself in the bathroom. I turned on the faucet so she wouldn't hear my ragged breathing. I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw an old man, with tired eyes, with his jaw clenched from the effort not to scream. And I thought, how do you get to this point? How do you go from sharing a life with someone to not recognizing them? How can you love a person so much that they end up breaking your soul? That night, while she slept, I checked her phone. I'm not proud of it. I had never done it before. But fear and doubt make you cross lines you never imagined. I found no messages. Everything was clean, too perfect. And that hurt more than any proof. Silence can also be a sign of guilt. The next day, Ethan, my grandson, came to spend the afternoon with me. We played in the garden. We talked about simple things. For a little while, for the first time in days, I felt like life still made sense. Until, without realizing it, he wounded me again with his innocence. "Grandpa, why doesn't Uncle Richard come over when you're here?" he asked while arranging his toys. I froze. "What Uncle Richard?" I asked in a low voice. "Grandma's friend. He says he's going to teach me how to fish." I swallowed hard. The air left my lungs for a moment. I sat down on the garden bench, trying to remain calm. "And what's he like, son?" I asked, my heart racing. "He's young. He has gray hair. He always smells really nice. He brings Grandma flowers." I closed my eyes. Every word was another stab. A child can't lie with that much detail. He just repeats what he sees. And Ethan had seen it all. I couldn't eat dinner that night. Linda spoke to me, but her voice sounded distant, as if it were coming from another world. I lied, saying I was tired, and locked myself in the workshop. I turned on the lamp and stayed there, looking at the clocks I repaired out of habit. The hands turned, tirelessly, reminding me that time doesn't stop, not even when your heart breaks. I started to remember the times she said she needed space, the nights she got out of bed and said she was getting water but took 20 minutes to come back, the messages that appeared on her phone that she deleted in a hurry, the stifled laughter when I came home without warning. It was all there. I just hadn't wanted to see it. Sometimes love becomes a blindfold, and when it falls off, what you see can never be forgotten. I went out to the patio and looked at the sky. The moon was full, beautiful, but it meant nothing to me. I only saw darkness. I thought about Ethan, about what he had heard, about how that dirty truth was contaminating even his childhood, and I felt rage, not for the infidelity, but for the disloyalty to everything we had built. Linda came home late again. I waited up for her, sitting in the armchair, with the scarf folded on my lap. When she walked in, She saw it immediately. She stood motionless, as if she had seen a ghost. "Where did you find that?" she asked, trying to sound calm. "In the car," I replied without looking at her. "Oh, it must be Betty's." "Of course," I said with a bitter smile. "Betty's." She walked past me, her gaze fixed on the floor, and went straight to the bedroom. I turned off the light and stayed there, in the darkness, listening to her footsteps, her sighs, her silence, and I knew there was no going back. That night, for the first time in years, we slept in separate beds. Not because we agreed to, but because love no longer fit between us. Before closing my eyes, I made a promise. Tomorrow I will know the truth. With my own eyes. Suspecting won't be enough. I will see it, I will look it in the face, and on that day, Linda will know who I am. The clock struck 2 in the morning. The wind hit the windows, and in that dark silence, doubt stopped being a burden. Now, it was a decision. I woke up with a single idea in my head. That day, I would know everything. I no longer wanted assumptions, or doubts, or excuses. I wanted to look the truth in the face, no matter how cruel. I had spent entire nights imagining the sound of those laughs, those voices, those moans my grandson had heard. But imagining wasn't enough. I needed to see it. I needed to put a face to the enemy, and to the lie. That morning Linda acted as usual. She made breakfast, put flowers on the table, and gave me a kiss on the cheek. Soft, distant, almost out of habit. I responded with a calm smile, the kind that can fool the devil himself. The real theater begins with the simplest gestures. "I'll have to stay late at the workshop today," I told her as I grabbed my coat. She looked up, feigning surprise. "Late? Yes. A client wants to pick up a clock before the weekend. I don't want to let him down." "Oh, of course," she replied, almost with relief, and that relief was my confirmation. During lunch, we talked about unimportant things. I watched her in silence. Every word she said, every light laugh, sounded to me like the echo of a farce that had been on stage for too long. The sun came through the window and lit up her face, the same face I had loved my whole life, and for the first time, it seemed unfamiliar. That afternoon, I locked myself in the workshop, but not to work. I polished the old pocket watch that had belonged to my father. I opened it and looked at the inscription he had engraved inside. "Time reveals what silence hides," and I understood that my moment had come. I put the watch in my pocket and began to prepare my lie. I left the car keys on the table, as I always did, and walked out. I went around the corner, waited a few minutes, and came back through the backyard. I knew every corner of that house better than the back of my hand. I had built that home with my own hands, brick by brick, with love, and now that same place would help me discover the truth. It was 6 in the evening when I heard the sound of a car. Linda came out of the house with her phone in her hand, looking from side to side, nervous. I hid behind the lemon tree in the garden. I watched as she got into a gray vehicle that parked in front of the house. Inside, a man with graying hair, in a suit, in his late 50s. She got in without hesitation, smiling. The car started and disappeared down the street. My heart was pounding in my chest. It was him, the famous friend who moans in my bed, and although rage filled me, I did nothing, because the pain of betrayed love isn't shouted. It's planned. I waited for an hour, then 2. As the sun began to set, the car returned. Linda got out, her hair disheveled, her face flushed. She entered the house silently, like a thief. I kept waiting. I knew it wouldn't be long before she showered, prepared dinner, and pretended that nothing had happened. At 8 o'clock sharp, I came back in through the front door, making noise with my keys, feigning normalcy. "You're back?" she asked from the kitchen, with a sweet voice that turned my stomach. "Yes. Everything went well. The client was satisfied." "That's great, my love. Sit down." "Dinner is ready." I sat across from her. We ate in silence, like two strangers sharing a table only out of obligation. Her eyes avoided mine. I didn't say a single word. Inside, there was only one thought. Tomorrow, I will know the whole truth. It was hard to sleep that night. The clocks in the workshop marked the slow hours, and each tick-tock pushed me closer to the abyss. In my mind, everything was clear. I would get up early, pretend I had a meeting, leave with my bags, and return at midnight, without a sound, without lights. And what I saw would be the final proof. At 6 in the morning, while it was still dark, I packed my bag. I packed a couple of shirts, a book, and my father's watch. Linda watched me from the hallway, half asleep. "You're leaving so early?" she asked. "Yes. Work doesn't wait. I might be away for a few days. A few days? For what? She asked, with feigned interest. Company business? Nothing serious. Well, take care, she said, and kissed my cheek. Her kiss tasted of betrayal, of lies, of the end of a story. I left with a firm step, got in the car, and drove a few miles to the town's lookout point. There, I waited. The sun rose, the day grew long, and I counted the hours one by one. At 11, I called her from an unknown number. She answered, not knowing who it was. Hello? Linda, it's me, I said with a tired voice. The trip is taking longer. I won't be back until Saturday. Oh, okay. Get some rest, she replied quickly, relieved. That relief was enough for me. I returned home at midnight. I left the car 3 blocks away and walked in silence, my heart beating so loudly I feared it would betray me. The window to our bedroom was slightly open. From there, the dim light of the bedside lamp illuminated the curtains. I heard laughter, whispers, and then the sounds that confirmed everything. I didn't go in right away. I stood still, in the darkness, listening, with my fists clenched. Every second was a wound. And still I didn't cry, because tears are a luxury that the naive can afford. I was no longer naive. I took a breath, walked to the front door, opened it carefully, and moved down the hallway. The floorboards creaked under my steps, as if the house itself felt shame. I reached the bedroom door. Light filtered through the crack. I heard her voice and another, masculine, close. My hands trembled. I rested my hand on the doorknob. I took a deep breath, and in a whisper, I said to myself, Now you will know the truth, Robert, the whole truth. I turned the knob slowly. The door opened a few inches, and what I saw on the other side tore my soul out. When I opened the door, the air grew thick, as if the whole house was holding its breath. The smell of Linda's perfume, mixed with sweat and wine, filled the room. The bedside lamp cast a yellowish light on the bed, and the shadows seemed to move to the rhythm of something that shouldn't be happening. And there they were, she and he, naked, locked in an embrace that twisted my gut. I didn't scream. I didn't make a sound. I just stood there, still as a stone statue, watching as the woman I had shared 40 years of my life with erased me in a second. For a moment, time ceased to exist. I could only hear my own heartbeat and the sound of their ragged breaths. Linda turned her head, saw me, and her face transformed. First it was surprise, then fear, and then shame. She pulled away from him, trembling, trying to cover herself. "Robert!" she cried. "It's not what you think." That phrase, the same one all guilty people say, made me feel a deep nausea. "It's not what I think," I whispered. "Then tell me, Linda, what am I seeing?" The man, that miserable wretch, tried to get up, but his face paralyzed me. It was Richard, my daughter's husband, my grandson's father, my son-in-law. I felt the floor open up beneath me. For an instant, I thought I was going to faint. The betrayal was double, triple, infinite. I hadn't just lost my wife, I had lost my family. Linda was crying, trying to cover herself with the sheets, babbling impossible excuses. Richard said nothing. He just looked down, ashamed, knowing that any word would be another insult. I took a step into the room. My hands were shaking, but my voice came out calm, as if it wasn't my own. "How long, Linda? How long have you been sleeping with our daughter's husband?" she cried. She trembled. "We didn't plan it. It was all a mistake," she mumbled through her sobs. A mistake. That's what she called the disaster that had destroyed my life. I laughed, humorlessly, a broken laugh that hurt my chest. "A mistake," I repeated. "Do you know how many times I slept beside you while you were thinking of him? How many times I looked at you, believing you still loved me?" She lowered her head. I walked over to Richard. The coward couldn't even meet my gaze. "And you?" I said, in a tone I didn't recognize in myself. "You slept with your wife's mother? With your son's grandmother?" He didn't answer. He just whispered something inaudible. And that's what enraged me the most. His silence, his fear, his mediocrity. A man who betrays and doesn't have the courage to own it. "Get out," I told him. "Robert, please," Linda stammered. "I said get out." Richard dressed clumsily, gathered his clothes, and left without looking at me. The sound of his footsteps fading away was the only comfort I had on that cursed night. Linda remained there, crying, barely covered by the sheets. I looked at her for a long time. She was a woman I had known since she was 19, but at that moment, she seemed like a complete stranger. She had aged before my eyes. Her face, once full of life, now only showed guilt. "Why, Linda?" I finally asked, my voice breaking. She looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't know," she said. "I don't know when it happened, Robert. I felt lonely, empty. You weren't the same anymore." "And that justifies what you did?" "No," she whispered, "but it's what happened." I fell silent. There were so many things I wanted to say, but none of them made sense. Rage and love were mixed inside me, creating a storm that made it hard to breathe. In the end, I just managed to pick up my coat from the armchair. "Don't worry," I said, walking toward the door. "I won't make a scene. I won't scream. I won't say anything. But tonight, Linda, you have killed everything I ever was," she sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I walked to the door, and before leaving, I turned around one last time. "And if you ever wonder what you lost, just remember this. You didn't lose a man. You lost someone who loved you more than his own life." I closed the door behind me. The cold of the early morning hit my face. I walked down the street aimlessly, with my suitcase in one hand and my soul in pieces. The silence was absolute. Not even the dogs were barking. It was as if the entire world had stopped to watch my life fall apart. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. I slept in my car, in front of the workshop, and as the dawn painted the sky, I understood that something inside me had changed forever. I was no longer the same man who had left that house. I had crossed an invisible line, and on the other side there was only emptiness. But in that emptiness there was also a promise of justice, not with violence but with something much more powerful, the truth, and one day that truth would destroy them. I didn't sleep that night. The dawn found me sitting in my car, with a lost gaze, and a heart so tired it no longer hurt. The body gets used to pain, but the soul doesn't. The soul, when it breaks, makes a sound no one else can hear. Through the windshield, I watched the city wake up. People walking, kids heading to school, cars honking. Everything was the same, as if my world hadn't collapsed just hours before. And in that contrast, I found something cruel. Your own pain always seems small when the world doesn't stop. I started the engine and drove aimlessly. I passed by places where we had been happy. The coffee shop where we met, the theater where we saw our first movie, the church where we baptized our daughter. It all seemed like a mockery of fate. Every memory had Linda's face, and every corner, the echo of what would no longer be. I stopped the car by the river and just sat there, watching the water flow. I thought about jumping, about disappearing, about letting time erase me like a stone in the current. But no, I wasn't going to give them that power. Not her, not him. They had taken my peace, but not my name, not my dignity. At noon, I went back to the workshop, washed my face, tried to pull myself together. I knew that sooner or later I would have to see them again. Not Linda, but my daughter, and that thought squeezed my chest. It wasn't her fault, or so I thought. Until that moment, that afternoon, my daughter Lucy arrived with Ethan, my grandson. She walked in, smiling, as if nothing was wrong. "Dad, I came to see you. Mom told me you've been a little strange these days." Strange. That was the word she used. If she knew what her mother had done, she wouldn't have called me strange. She would have called me dead. Ethan ran to me, climbed onto my lap, and hugged me with that strength only children have. And it was that hug that kept me standing. For him, not for anyone else. I decided to hold back. "I'm fine, honey," I lied, "just tired." "I know you, Dad. Don't lie to me," she insisted. "Did you fight with Mom?" I looked at her intently. She was just like Linda when she was young. Same smile, same eyes, and yet, seeing her hurt more than anything else. "No, Lucy, we didn't fight. Sometimes life just wears out, that's all." She watched me in silence, confused. She didn't press. But I knew from her look that she suspected something. That night, when they left, I was alone in the workshop. The silence was so thick it seemed to have weight. Only the tick-tock of the clocks filled the air, reminding me that time kept moving forward, even though my life had stopped. I didn't want to go back to the house, but I couldn't help but wonder what she was doing. Was she sleeping peacefully? Did she feel guilty? Or was she still sending messages to that bastard? Every thought was a stab of pain. At 10 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Linda. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Her voice was broken. "Robert, please, let's talk." It wasn't what it looked like. "I'm begging you, don't hate me." I didn't reply. I did hate her, yes, but even worse. It hurt to still love her, because love doesn't die instantly. It dies in silence, and I was learning to listen to it die. I turned off my phone and poured myself a drink. The whiskey burned my throat, but it wasn't enough to burn away the memories. I took a piece of paper and started writing. Not a farewell letter, but a promise. I won't make a scene, Linda. I won't tarnish your name, but you won't tarnish mine either. What you did will not go unpunished. I won't scream. I won't cry. I will just wait for the right moment, and when it comes, you and Richard will understand what it means to lose everything. I put the paper in the desk drawer. I folded it carefully, like someone saving a bullet. That night I slept on the workshop floor. The cold seeped into my bones, but it was better than the warmth of a bed that was no longer mine. I stared at the ceiling, at the wooden beams, and thought about how life can turn in a single second. A child asks an innocent question, and everything comes crashing down. When I woke up, the sun was just beginning to rise. I went out to the patio and breathed in the cool air. The birds were singing as if the world was blameless. I lit a cigarette and let it burn down between my fingers. It was my way of keeping the silence company. Mid-morning, Lucy called again. Dad, Mom is doing really bad. She won't eat. She won't stop crying. Don't call me to talk about her, I said, my voice cold. What's going on between you two? She insisted. Ask your husband. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, so long I could hear her breathing speed up. What do you mean by that, Dad? Ask him, Lucy, I repeated and hung up. That was the beginning of my disappearance. I turned off my phone, packed a few things, closed the workshop, and left town without looking back. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to leave. Sometimes silence is the only refuge left. I drove for hours. The road was long, lonely. I passed through towns I didn't know, dry fields, mountains. The sun was setting and the sky was stained red, like an open wound. And in that landscape, I understood that silence didn't just hurt, it also healed. I didn't go home that night, or the next, or for a long time, because sometimes, to get your soul back, you have to lose everything. And I was willing to start over, even if it was from nothing. The day I crossed the town line without looking back, I felt something inside me break for good. It wasn't just the marriage, or the betrayal, or the pain. It was my entire life splitting into two halves that no longer fit. Behind me were the memories, the portraits, the laughter, the house I built with my own hands, and a woman who had decided to destroy it all. I drove for hours without a destination. The road seemed endless. The wind beat against the car window, and every mile was a way of distancing myself from the past, even though I knew that memory travels with you, hidden in the back seat. I ended up in a small coastal town, a quiet place, almost forgotten by time, where the smell of salt and wet wood mixed with the voices of fishermen at dawn. I rented a room in an old boarding house facing the harbor. The owner, a man with a white beard and kind eyes, didn't ask many questions. I liked that. I had no answers to give. The first few days were filled with absolute silence. I would walk on the beach at sunset, listening to the sea and trying to empty my head. But the sea has a memory, and with every wave, it seemed to return the images I wanted to forget. Linda's face, my daughter's eyes when I told her to talk to her husband, my grandson's innocent voice repeating that damned question. Sometimes, in the early morning, I would wake up with a start, feeling like someone was calling my name. I'd turn on the lamp, look at the empty room, and find myself alone, with the echo of my own thoughts. Loneliness, when it's not chosen, has a bitter taste. I tried to distract myself with work. In the harbor market, I found a small, abandoned workshop. The owner rented it to me for cheap, and little by little, I fixed it up. I started repairing clocks for the neighbors, just like I used to, and with every gear that started turning again, I felt like a piece of me was also being put back together. Weeks passed, time became kinder, or maybe I just learned not to fight it. I heard nothing from Linda, until one day, while cleaning the workshop counter, a woman came in with an envelope in her hand. "Are you Robert?" she asked. I nodded. "I was asked to give this to you." It was a letter. I recognized my daughter's handwriting, Lucy's. For several minutes I couldn't bring myself to open it. My hands were shaking. When I finally did, the words seemed to scream at me from the paper. "Dad, Mom is very sick. She isn't eating, she isn't sleeping. She says she wants to see you. I don't know what happened between you, but please, come back. Richard left too. Ethan asks about you every night. He says he dreamed you were fixing clocks and that you were calling his name. Please, Dad, come home." I read the letter over and over until the letters blurred with my tears. But I wasn't crying for her. I was crying for what we were, for the family that no longer existed, for the boy who didn't understand why his grandfather had disappeared. I put the letter in my pocket and went for a walk on the beach. The sea was calm, as if it were listening to me. I thought about going back, about looking Linda in the eyes, about closing that circle of pain, but I still couldn't. The wound was still open, and forgiveness can't be rushed. The days went on. The letter became a constant weight in my pocket, a reminder that the past was still alive, even though I tried to bury it. Every time I touched it, I wondered if Lucy knew the truth, if Linda had found the courage to confess everything, and if she had, what was left of her after that? One afternoon, while I was working, a boy came into the workshop. He was about 8 years old, with dark hair and big eyes. For a moment I thought it was Ethan, but it wasn't. It was the fisherman's son from the corner. He came to see how the clocks worked. He sat next to me and watched with a clean, pure curiosity, and in his voice I heard an echo of the grandson I couldn't see. "Why do you fix clocks, mister?" "Because time breaks," I replied, "and when that happens, someone has to fix it." The boy smiled, and that smile gave me a little peace. That night, while the town slept, I wrote my reply to the letter. "Dear Lucy, don't worry about me. I'm okay. Don't be angry with your mother. Sometimes people get lost and don't know how to come back. I need time. Tell Ethan that his grandpa loves him more than he can explain, and tell your mother that I still remember her, even if I don't look for her anymore." I folded the letter and put it away. I never sent it, because I understood that some things should be written but not said. Silence sometimes is more eloquent than any word. Months passed. The workshop began to thrive. The neighbors greeted me, and slowly the weight of the past began to fade, until one winter afternoon I heard a voice behind me that stopped time. "Robert," she whispered. It was Linda, thinner, older, with sunken eyes and a tremor in her hands. She had traveled to this town, and behind her voice I knew she brought something more than regret. "I need to talk to you," she said, with tears in her eyes. And then, without answering her, I understood that the silence was over. When I heard her voice behind me, I felt my heart stop for a second. That voice I had known for over 40 years, which had so often soothed and also wounded me, sounded different. It wasn't the voice of the woman who betrayed me. It was the voice of someone defeated, slow, fragile, almost pleading. I turned around slowly. Linda stood before me, in an old coat, her face pale, her eyes sunken with exhaustion. She looked like she had aged 10 years in the few months I hadn't seen her. The harbor wind blew her hair, and I knew, just by looking at her, that something inside her had broken too. "I didn't think we'd see each other again," I said, my voice dry. She looked down. "Me neither, but I had to come. I couldn't go on living without asking for your forgiveness, Robert." That word, forgiveness, hurt more than the betrayal because coming from her, it sounded hollow, late, like a candle lit on a grave. "There's nothing you can say that will change what you did," I replied. "I know, but I need you to listen to me." I didn't answer. I just pointed to the chair in front of me. She sat down slowly, her hands trembling in her lap. For a moment, the silence was so thick that you could only hear the sound of the waves crashing against the pier. "After you left," she began, "the house became a hell. Lucy hated me. Richard disappeared. And Ethan asked me about you every night. 'When is Grandpa coming back?' he would say." I didn't know what to tell him. Her voice broke. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. I felt no pity. I felt emptiness, because I could no longer hate her, but I couldn't love her either. I was trapped in that space where emotions die, and only memory remains. "Don't look for my sympathy, Linda," I finally said. "I'm not looking for it, I'm looking for peace. Peace comes when you pay what you owe. And believe me, I'm paying for it, Robert. Every day, every morning I wake up and see your empty side of the bed. Every time Ethan asks about you and I have to lie to him, that sentence hit me hard. The thought of my grandson, of his confusion, of the collateral damage of our tragedy, made me clench my fists. He had been an innocent witness to it all, the unwilling bearer of the truth. "Do you know what the worst part is, Linda?" I asked. She looked at me with wet eyes. "The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the contempt. It was looking at you and feeling that you didn't even have the courage to look me in the eye. That after so many years, the only thing you gave me was silence." Linda nodded, trembling. "I didn't know how to stop what I did. It was a mistake that became a habit, a weakness that dragged me down. I felt old, invisible, and Richard made me feel alive. I laughed without humor. 'Alive,' you say. And now? 'Dead,' she whispered, and that word hung between us like a confession made too late. I stood up, unable to listen to her anymore. I walked to the door and looked at the sea. The sunset painted the sky a sad red, and I thought that the color of forgiveness must look like that, something beautiful and painful at the same time. "You shouldn't have come, Linda," I said without turning around. I had to, out of guilt, out of love. That answer made me turn around. I looked at her for a long time, searching her face for any trace of the woman I once loved unconditionally. But I couldn't find her. Only her shadow remained. "And what do you expect from me?" I asked. "For me to forgive you?" "No," she replied in a low voice. "Just for you to listen to me, to know that you weren't the one to blame." I remained silent, because deep down, a part of me did feel guilty. I had let routine extinguish what was once a fire. I had stopped looking at her, talking to her, making her feel alive. And although nothing justified what she did, that shared guilt hurt me even more. Linda stood up, walked toward me, and touched my hand. It was a light gesture, but I could feel her trembling. "I just wanted to see you one more time, Robert. I wanted you to know that, despite everything, I loved you. I didn't pull my hand away, but I didn't hold hers either. I left it there, motionless, between hers, as if that gesture were the last bridge between two lives that could no longer meet. I don't know what love means anymore, Linda," I finally said. "Because, if this was love, I prefer silence." She nodded with tears in her eyes. "Then I'll go." I walked her to the door. The sea wind was blowing hard, and her coat moved as if trying to hold her back. Before she left, she looked at me one last time. "Lucy doesn't know the truth," she said. "But Ethan heard me cry your name every night." I didn't know what to say. She lowered her head and walked away. Her footsteps echoed on the pier until they faded, and I stood there, watching the horizon, understanding that exile wasn't a place, it was a state of the soul. I didn't sleep that night. I opened my daughter's letter for the umpteenth time, reread it slowly, and understood that I had to go back. Not for Linda, not even for myself, but for Ethan, for the boy who had witnessed the end of a family, and who deserved to know that love, even when it breaks, can heal. I took my father's watch. I put it in my pocket and wrote a single sentence in my notebook. "Time reveals what silence hides." At dawn, I knew it was time to return. Returning felt like walking through a dream. The road I had traveled in anger months before now felt different, as if time had changed the colors of everything. The streets seemed narrower, the houses older, and the air thicker. I wasn't the same man who had left, not the same one who had loved, not even the same one who had hated. I was someone tired, with no desire for revenge, but with a deep need to understand. I arrived at the house on a gray afternoon. The gate was ajar, and the garden neglected. The flowers Linda had tended to with such care were withered, and the old lemon tree we planted the year Lucy was born had dry branches. The silence was absolute. Not a voice, not a footstep, not a sound to tell me that someone lived there. I knocked on the door. Nothing. I pushed it gently. It opened with a long creak, as if the wood itself was complaining about my return. Inside, everything smelled of confinement and dust. The furniture covered with white sheets, the portraits crooked, the clocks stopped. It was as if time had left with me. I walked to the living room. On the table was an envelope. My name was written in Linda's handwriting. I trembled when I saw it. For a moment, I didn't want to open it. I was afraid that inside that piece of paper lay the final wound, but the silence forced me to. I sat down, and with trembling hands, I broke the seal. Inside, there was a long letter, written in blue ink, with small smudges that looked like dried tears. I began to read. "Robert, if you are reading this, it means you finally came back. I am no longer here. My body couldn't bear what my soul carried. I swear I tried to go on. I prayed for you to return. I dreamed of seeing you walk through the door just to tell me that, even if you didn't forgive me, at least you would listen. But I know I didn't deserve that comfort. I made the worst mistake of my life, and I don't just mean betraying you, but betraying the life we built. Richard was a shadow, a distraction for an empty woman who no longer knew who she was. But you were always my truth. Lucy never knew anything. And I beg you, Robert, don't tell her. Let her live with a clean image of her mother. Let her remember me as someone who loved her, even if I failed as a wife. Ethan asks about you every night. I tell him you're working far away, fixing clocks for important people. And he smiles. He says that when he grows up, he wants to fix time too, like his grandpa. That gives me a little peace. I'm leaving you this house. It's yours, as it always was. And in the drawer of the end table, next to the armchair where you like to read, there's a gift. It's not much, but it represents what I have left of you, my gratitude, my love, and my regret. If there is something after this life, I hope to see you there, where time doesn't exist and silence doesn't hurt. Yours always, Linda. When I finished reading, the tears were falling uncontrollably. I couldn't remember the last time I had cried like that, perhaps because I had never cried out of compassion until that moment. I stood up and walked to the armchair she mentioned in the letter. I opened the drawer. Inside was a small, old wooden box. I opened it carefully. Inside, I found my father's watch, the one I thought was lost, but it was no longer the same. On the back case, delicately engraved, were 3 words, "Still waiting for you." I felt the air leave my lungs. I pressed the watch against my chest and closed my eyes. The sound of its ticking, for it miraculously worked, filled the silence of the house, and that tick-tock was like hearing her breathe one last time. I don't know how long I was there, maybe hours, maybe just minutes, but I knew in that instant that something inside me was being set free. I went out to the garden, sat under the lemon tree, and looked at the cloudy sky. The air smelled of rain. I thought of Linda, of her guilt, of her trembling voice, of the twisted love that had united and destroyed us. And for the first time, I felt no resentment, only sadness, and a deep compassion for us both, because, in the end, no one comes out of love unscathed, and we all, in some way, end up being guilty of something. That night I slept at home for the first time since I left, and at dawn the clock was still ticking, as if she were still there, reminding me that even the deepest wounds can beat again. The dawn found me sitting in the garden, with my father's watch in my hand and Linda's letter on my lap. The tick-tock filled the air like a constant breath, a reminder that time moved on, even though I felt mine had stopped. The sky was turning gray, as if it knew what I was about to do, return to the only place that still tied me to life. Lucy, my daughter, the only reason I had left not to become just another ghost. I looked at the empty house one last time. The walls held the history of a family that no longer existed, laughter that time had devoured, photographs hanging like witnesses to a lie, smells that still lingered like open wounds. I felt no hatred, no love, just a silent need to close this circle. I left the letter on the table next to the watch and walked out slowly. The wind hit my face with the smell of rain and wet earth. As I walked to the car, I thought of Linda, of what she must have felt writing those words, of the weight of her guilt, of the loneliness that killed her without anyone noticing, and I understood something it took me a lifetime to learn. Sometimes the punishment isn't imposed by another, but by oneself. I started the engine and drove with no fixed destination. The road stretched out before me like an old scar, marked by the years, but still visible. For the first few hours, the silence inside the car was unbearable, until, in a reflex action, I turned on the radio. An old song filled the air. It was one of the ones Linda used to sing while cooking on Sundays. I had to turn it off. I didn't want the past to have a voice again. The journey was long. I crossed towns, fields, and roads I knew by heart. Every mile was a thought, a question, a doubt. What would I say to Lucy? Would I tell her the truth about her mother? Did I have the right to break her soul to soothe mine? When I arrived in her town, the sky was covered with heavy clouds. The wind dragged leaves and dust through the streets, and people hurried to take shelter before the rain fell. I parked in front of my daughter's house. It was a small house, painted white, with a garden full of flowers and toys scattered on the ground. The sound of a bicycle falling echoed from the past. Ethan, as soon as I got out of the car, I saw him running towards the door, laughing. He had grown. He was no longer the 8-year-old boy who asked me the question that changed my life. Now he was a tall boy, with messy hair, and the same curious eyes as always. When he saw me, he stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes widened in disbelief. "Grandpa." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, barely, and then he ran to me. He hugged me with a force that broke me inside. His heart beat fast against my chest, and for an instant, all the pain disappeared. Because in that hug was life, the innocence that the deceit had not been able to corrupt. "You came back, Grandpa," he whispered with a trembling voice. "Mom said you would never come back." "I'm here, son," I said, stroking his hair. "And I'm not leaving again." The door opened. Lucy was there, motionless, her face a mix of relief and bewilderment. She had aged. She had dark circles under her eyes, her hair pulled back, the tired expression of someone who has spent more time crying than living. "Dad," she said faintly, with a thread of a voice. I didn't answer. I couldn't. For a moment we looked at each other in silence, and in her eyes I saw a mix of pain, anger, and love that needed no words. "Come in, please," she finally said, stepping aside. I entered. The house smelled of fresh coffee, of home, of everything I had lost. On the dining room wall were pictures of Ethan, school drawings, and among them a photo of me. She hadn't completely erased me, and that, amidst everything, was like a breath of fresh air. We sat at the table, the three of us. Ethan went to his room, leaving space for the conversation he knew had to happen. Lucy remained silent, her hands clasped together. I waited for her to speak first, but she was the one who couldn't hold it in any longer. "Mom died 3 months ago," she said abruptly, without beating around the bush. I felt the air being knocked out of me. I knew she was dead. I had sensed it from the letter, but hearing those words from my daughter's mouth was different. It was real. It was final. Lucy took a deep breath. "I didn't want to tell you before. I didn't know where you were, or if you wanted to know." I nodded in silence. "She left a letter for you," she continued. "She told me that if you ever came back, I should give it to you, but I think you already found it." "Yes," I replied in a whisper. I read it. Lucy looked down. "I never understood why you left like that, without an explanation. I thought you had gone crazy, that you wanted to punish us all, but when Mom got sick, I started to suspect." I remained silent. I knew this moment would come. I knew I would have to face the truth I had avoided for so long. "Lucy," I began with a trembling voice, "there are things a daughter shouldn't know. Things that, if she knew them, she could never forget." "And you think I don't know?" She interrupted me, her eyes full of tears. "Dad, I'm not stupid. I know what happened." I sat still. My heart sank. "You know?" "Yes. Mom confessed to me before she died. She said she couldn't leave with that weight on her conscience, that she needed to tell me." I looked at her, incredulous. I didn't know whether to feel relief or sadness. Lucy was crying, but her tears were not just for her mother. They were for everything, for me, for her childhood, for the family that the lie had destroyed. "At first, I hated her," she said. "I couldn't believe it. I couldn't understand how she could have been capable of something so dirty, so cruel. But then I saw her get sick. I saw her wither away, and I knew she was already paying for it." Her voice broke. "You didn't see her in those last days, Dad. She wouldn't eat, she wouldn't sleep. She just stared out the window with the watch in her hand, that watch of yours, the one you have now. She said that if she listened to it long enough, maybe you would forgive her." I couldn't answer. Every word she said was a blow. The image of Linda, alone, waiting for the forgiveness I never got to give her, tore my soul apart. "Lucy," I finally said, taking her hand, "there are no words to erase what happened. But I want you to know something. I never completely hated her. I loved her even when it hurt to do so. And if I didn't come back sooner, it was because I was afraid to see what was left of us." She looked at me, with tears streaming down her cheeks. "She knew you would come back. She always said it, that one day the clock would chime again and you would walk through that door. And when she died smiling." I couldn't help it. I cried. I cried like I hadn't cried in my entire life. Lucy hugged me. And for the first time since that cursed night, I felt the weight begin to lift. Because pain, when shared, hurts less. And because, despite everything, there were still the three of us. Her, Ethan, and me. "And Richard?" I asked after a long silence. Lucy looked away. "He left. He disappeared after you left. He tried to come back months later, but I couldn't look at him anymore. I kicked him out of the house. I never heard from him again." I nodded. I felt no satisfaction, no revenge, just an infinite exhaustion, the kind of exhaustion that war leaves after the last battle. "Don't look for justice, Dad," she said. "Life has already taken care of it." I stared out the window. Ethan was playing in the garden, laughing, oblivious to everything, and I thought that maybe that was the only thing worth saving, his innocence, so that he wouldn't have to carry the sins of the adults. Lucy poured me a coffee. We sat in silence. The wall clock marked the time. Paused. Constant. The same sound that had filled my childhood, my days with Linda, my nights of solitude, but now it sounded different. It sounded like peace. "Dad," she said in a soft voice, "stay." "Here?" "Yes. At home. Ethan needs you." "And so do I." I looked at her with tenderness. There was so much pain in her words, but also hope. the hope of rebuilding something, even if it was on the ruins. I nodded. All right, I'll stay. That night, I slept in the guest room. The sound of the rain against the windows lulled me to sleep as if the world was giving me permission to rest. For the first time in a long time, I didn't dream of the past, only of the sea, and of a distant voice that said, "Time reveals what silence hides." When I woke up, Ethan came running in and jumped on the bed. "Grandpa, today I want you to teach me how to fix clocks," he said, laughing, and his laughter was the most beautiful sound I had heard in years. I hugged him, and as I did, I knew the cycle was closed. Even if life takes away what we love most, it always leaves something behind. A second chance to love differently, wiser, more human. I looked out the window. The sun was filtering through the clouds, and the clock on the table read 7:10, the same time that, years ago, Linda and I had said "I do" at the altar. I smiled, because even though she was no longer here, her time was still beating in mine. And in that gentle tick-tock, I finally found what I had been searching for: peace. Weeks have passed since I returned. The house no longer feels strange. Every corner holds something of the past and something of the future. Lucy smiles a little more. Ethan runs in the garden. And sometimes, when the afternoon silence envelops everything, I could swear I hear the echo of a female voice humming an old song. Maybe it's the wind, or maybe it's Linda, still lingering among the memories that refuse to die. The clock is still on the dining room table. I clean it every morning, and every time I do, I find peace in the sound of its tick-tock. It's funny. For years I hated that sound because it reminded me of what I lost, and now I seek it out like someone seeking company. Time doesn't heal anything, but it teaches you to see things differently. One afternoon, while Ethan was doing his homework, Lucy came down with a wooden box in her hands. "Dad, I found this among Mom's things," she said. "It's locked. I think you should be the one to see it." The box was small, the size of a book. It had a rusty lock and a nearly faded label. On the lid, a single word was engraved in a firm hand. "Us." My heart skipped a beat. That word was too big for such a small box. I looked for the key among Linda's things, without success, until Ethan, curious, approached with a smile. "Grandpa, I know how to pick locks," he said, and with a small paperclip, he forced it open in seconds. The metallic click sounded like a wound opening. Inside were letters, dozens of them, some addressed to me, others with no name. There were old photos, newspaper clippings, a yellow envelope with my full name on it. For Robert, if he ever wants to understand. My hands were shaking. Lucy sat next to me. Ethan, as if understanding that this was not for him, went to the garden. I opened the envelope. Inside was a long letter, written in the same blue ink as the last one I found at home. But this one was different. It wasn't a farewell. It was a confession. "Robert, if you are reading this, it's because you decided to come back, or because fate finally pushed you to know the truth I never had the courage to tell you. I know you hate me, and I understand. But before you close this letter, promise me you'll read to the end. What happened with Richard was not what you think. He was not my lover. He was my accomplice. Let me explain. When I found out I was sick, I didn't want to tell you. I was scared. Scared you would look at me with pity, that you would waste away with me. The diagnosis was clear. Cancer. Advanced stage. I only had a few months. Richard was the one who went with me to the appointments, who helped me hide it, who promised to keep silent so you wouldn't find out. He was my support, but never my lover. The night Ethan told you about my friend was because he was sleeping at the house to take care of me. I could no longer be alone. My pain was unbearable, and he, out of compassion, stayed. But when I saw you leave without a word, I knew that silence had killed what the disease had not yet been able to. I didn't stop you, because I didn't want you to watch me die. I preferred you to hate me alive than to mourn me dead. If you ever feel guilty, remember this. I didn't lie to you out of betrayal. I lied to you out of love. I loved you until the end, Robert. And if I could go back, I would tell you everything. But it's too late. I only ask that you don't carry the guilt that was mine. Yours always, Linda. I didn't feel the tears coming. They were just there, silent, falling on the paper. Lucy looked at me confused. "What does it say, Dad?" she asked with a fearful voice. I couldn't answer right away. I took a deep breath, trying to get the words out without breaking. "It says I was wrong." I handed her the letter. She read it in silence. And at the end, when she looked up, she was crying too. My God, she whispered. All this time. I nodded, feeling weak. The weight of the years, of the resentment, of the sleepless nights imagining lies, fell on me with a devastating clarity. There had been no betrayal, only misunderstood love, fear, and silence. Linda had carried it all to protect me from a pain that, in the end, reached me anyway. And Richard, the man I had hated with all my soul, had been the only one who was with her when she needed him most. The enemy didn't exist. The enemy was my pride. I looked at the box, at the photos of us young, smiling on the beach, hugging a little Lucy, laughing with our eyes closed. Everything I had destroyed with my anger was still there, intact, waiting for me. And I understood, with a brutal clarity, that true love does not die with death or with a lie. It only transforms. Lucy took my hand. Dad, she loved you until the end. And I judged her without listening. No, she said softly, you were only human. Her words broke me, because, in the end, that's what we had all been, human, with mistakes, with silences, with a fear of loss. I didn't sleep that night. I went out to the garden and looked at the starry sky. The air was still, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that Linda was there. Not as a ghost, but as a warm memory that embraced me. I took the watch out of my pocket. The tick-tock sounded louder than ever. I opened it. On the back, under the words "Still waiting for you," I found something I had never noticed, a small, almost invisible engraving. A second message. I had to hold it up to the light to read it. It said, "Love needs no explanation." I smiled, and the air that escaped my lips was like a sigh that had been trapped for years. At dawn, I sat at the table, in front of the clock. Lucy was asleep, Ethan was dreaming in his room, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Because the truth, although it hurts, sets you free, and sometimes forgiveness is not for the one who left, but for oneself. I am writing these lines as the sun sets behind the garden trees. Ethan is playing outside, with the same smile as always, not knowing that every laugh of his gives me back years of my life. Lucy is making coffee in the kitchen, and her voice reaches me, broken by the sound of the clock. That clock, the same one that witnessed everything: love, silence, guilt, and forgiveness. And now it marks a different time, a time of peace. I have lived long enough to understand that resentment ages you faster than your own body, that the soul, when it doesn't forgive, rots away, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is not to stay, but to let go without ill will. For years I thought Linda's love had turned into betrayal, but now I know it was fear. Fear of losing me. Fear of watching me die with her. And when I think about that, I wonder how many times I have also hurt someone out of fear of being hurt. Ethan reminds me so much of her. Sometimes when he smiles or frowns, I see in him the reflection of what we once were, and that makes me understand that love, even if it fades in our bodies, leaves its roots in our blood. He is the proof that nothing is ever truly lost. This morning, while I was teaching him how to adjust the gears of the clock, he asked me, "Grandpa, why does time never stop?" I looked at him, not knowing what to answer. Then I told him, because if time stopped, we couldn't learn to forgive. He smiled, not fully understanding, but I knew that one day he would. I am writing this letter for him, for when I am gone, so that he knows who his grandfather was, and also who his grandmother was. Because I want him to understand that no one in this story was just a victim or a villain. We were human, and that's enough to explain almost everything. Dear Ethan, when you read this, you may already be a man. You may have your own silences, your own faults. I just want you to remember one thing. Never run from love, even if it hurts. There is nothing braver than loving knowing that one day you might lose it. Don't repeat my mistakes. Speak, forgive, hug before it's too late. And if you ever have to choose between being right or being at peace, choose peace. Because being right dries you up, but peace allows you to flourish. I folded the letter carefully and put it in the same box where Linda's used to be. The clock is still there, marking its slow rhythm. Each tick-tock seems to say my name, as if time is calling me softly. Lucy came into the room and smiled at me. "What are you writing, Dad?" "Just a few words for Ethan," I replied. "Can I read them?" "Not yet. It's for when I'm gone." She nodded without saying anything. She came closer, hugged me, and whispered in my ear, "Thank you for coming back." That thank you both hurt and healed me, because I understood that forgiveness is not asked for with words, but with presence, and that sometimes just being there, simply being, is worth more than any apology. The sun has almost set. The garden is covered in a golden light that makes the leaves of the old lemon tree shine, the same one Linda and I planted so many years ago. It still bears fruit, and every time a branch blossoms I feel like I can hear her voice telling me that everything is all right. Ethan runs in with dirty hands and a bright smile. "Grandpa!" he shouts. The clock started ticking louder again. "That's right, son." I tell him it's because it has finally learned to forgive. He laughs without understanding, but he hugs me, and in that hug I feel that my life, in the end, has had meaning. Tomorrow will be a new day, and when the clock strikes 7:10 again, like that time at the altar, I know that Linda will be there, between the sound of time and the scent of lemons, waiting for me without blame, because true love doesn't die, it just changes form. I close my eyes. The tick-tock becomes slow, paused, serene, and for the first time I am not afraid of the silence, because there is nothing left to forgive, only to be grateful for. Sometimes love doesn't end, it just changes form. And forgiveness, when it comes, doesn't erase the past, but illuminates it with peace. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to William's Revenge Stories, and tell us in the comments what city you're listening from. There are new stories every day, stories that remind us it's never too late to love again.